Shalom, everyone. Today we're going to break down one of the most important topics in all of human history, the Geula, the final redemption. We're going to break down the very core of what the Gula is, how Eretz Yisrael plays such a big part of it, what October 7th has to do with the Geula, and most importantly, what can you and every individual do on a personal level to completely change the course of history. So let's start with the foundation. We must start with acknowledging what Eretz Yisrael is. It's the subject of the very first interaction between Hashem and the very first Jew. The very first prophecy and promise to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov was that Hashem will give us this land. Because by giving us this land, Hashem was handing over to us, in physical form, the official mission to be Hashem's chosen people, and thereby give us the responsibility of rectifying the world. Because there are three integral parts needed to complete this mission: Klal Yisroel, the Torah, and Eretz Yisrael. If any one of these three ingredients would be missing, the ultimate goal of creation would have failed, and the world would cease to exist. Now, why Hashem set it up this way is beyond human comprehension. But the fact is, this is how Hashem set it up. Now, there are many analogies that can be used to explain the connection between Eretz Yisrael, the Torah, and Klal Yisroel. But to keep it simple, if you took a king, stripped him of his royal clothing, pulled him out of the palace, and dumped him in the middle of a poor town somewhere at the edge of the kingdom, the king no longer has any power. He can give orders to the people around him, but no one will listen. He can tell them he's the king, but why would anyone believe him? He may truly be the king, but without the proper clothing, entourage, and palace, he has no power. Not because he intrinsically changed, but because nobody recognizes his authority. The Jewish people are exactly the same. We may be divinely chosen by Hashem, and no matter where we are in the world, that cannot be taken away from us. But in order to rectify the world, to be a light unto the nations, and complete our mission, our leadership, authority, and sanctity needs to be recognizable. And to do that, we need to keep the Torah in its entirety, and we must do so in the king's palace, which, of course, is Eretz Yisrael. By not keeping the commandments of the Torah, and by not living in Eretz Yisrael, we are simply unrecognizable as the chosen nation of God. And thus, we do not have the ability to lead and rectify the world. Now let's move on to explain how serious of a job we have as Hashem's emissaries, and how big of a role Eretz Yisrael plays in the mission of the Jewish people. See, when 80% of Klal Yisroel refused to leave Egypt and follow Moshe Rabbeinu to Eretz Yisrael, Chazal tell us that they were all wiped out during the plague of darkness. And when the Meraglim convinced Klal Yisroel that they shouldn't enter Eretz Yisrael, the Meraglim and the entire generation of men had to die in the desert before Klal Yisroel could again have the opportunity to enter Eretz Yisrael. And not only that, but that day became Tisha B'Av, the day that almost every single major Jewish tragedy took place. Now that's very extreme. I mean, we have an entire Torah filled with hundreds of stories where Klal Yisroel either committed major sins or rebelled against Hashem. We're talking mass idol worship, murder, assimilation, and anything else you can imagine. But even with all this, we were never punished as severely as we were when Klal Yisroel refused to enter Eretz Yisrael. So you have to wonder, why is that? I understand Eretz Yisrael is a great mitzvah, but why were we so severely punished when we refused to perform this specific mitzvah? The answer is, as we just said, because Eretz Yisrael isn't just a mitzvah. It is the base of our entire mission in this world. Without Eretz Yisrael, we cannot perfect this world and create a resting place for Hashem's presence to dwell in. By rejecting Eretz Yisrael, we aren't just violating a mitzvah in the Torah, but rather we are completely rejecting our mission as the chosen people of God, and thereby the purpose of this physical world ceases to exist. And that is why Hashem punishes us more severely when we reject Eretz Yisrael more than any other sin in the Torah. And again, this is why Eretz Yisrael was the topic of the very first conversation that Hashem had with Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe Rabbeinu. This is why Eretz Yisrael is compared to 613 mitzvos. This is why Chazal tell us that performing mitzvos outside of Eretz Yisrael is only practice, and that living outside of Eretz Yisrael is as if one has no God. And this is also why Eretz Yisrael is the most talked about subject in the entire Torah, because it isn't just a mitzvah. It isn't just a holy land, but it is the core of fulfilling our entire purpose in this world. Now, understanding this, I'd like to explain how this all connects to October 7th and the war that we are currently in. See, God made a covenant with Avram Avinu that he would be the forefather of the chosen people, whose job it is to rectify the world. At this covenant, Hashem gave Avram Avinu the tool that would be needed to fulfill this mission. And of course, that tool is Eretz Yisrael. Now, some 2,600 years later, a wild man by the name of Muhammad founded a religion called Islam. The religion took Judaism, made some changes to it, and proclaimed that God never made the Jewish people his chosen nation, but rather anyone who's righteous and good would be part of the chosen people of God. Now, because of this, there were many centuries that Jews and Arabs were actually able to live in semi-peace together. Of course, as long as the Jews were considered second-class citizens. Over time, though, many Arabs felt threatened by the Jews due to our connection to Hashem, and the Arabs felt less and less comfortable with the Jewish existence. And of course, even though the Quran seems to claim that every righteous person is good in the eyes of God, like all fake religions, the Muslims started convincing themselves that they are the only chosen people, and anyone who isn't Muslim must die, especially the Jews, because Muslims know that the Jewish people are righteous, and inevitably, their greatest competition to being the chosen people of God. Now, when Eretz Yisrael was officially taken back by the Jews, and we once again became the reigning power of this land, the Muslims realized that they were in a lot of trouble. Because as all of our prophets have told us, after thousands of years of exile, Hashem will bring us back to this land and allow us to finally complete our mission as his one and only chosen nation. This is why in 1948, when the state of Israel came to be, the Arabs completely lost their minds. Because one by one, the promises made to the Jewish people are coming true. And with that comes the proof that we, the Jewish people, are the chosen nation of Hashem, and not the Muslims. That's why these animals named this October 7th war the Al-Aqsa flood, referring to the Har HaBayis, because they understand that if we, the Jewish people, take back full control of the Har HaBayis, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, that would mean that we are the chosen people of God. The Muslims are willing to give up everything and anything to stop us from reaching this point. And the saddest part is that many of the Jewish people aren't willing to give up almost anything to fight back. Hundreds of thousands of Torah-observant Jews aren't even willing to give up their American luxuries to settle this land, which would ultimately lead to the fulfillment of Hashem's covenant and inevitably the end of all this bloodshed. The sooner the Jewish people return to Eretz Yisrael, the sooner we will see peace and create the greatest Kiddush Hashem in all of human history. Now that we've established just a little bit of what Eretz Yisrael is, I want to talk about our role in all of this. Because whether you feel it or not, every Jew is a holy soul that yearns to return to Eretz Yisrael, to see the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, and to see the Geula. Now, there's a common misconception that has manifested within the minds of many Jews due to our long gullus. Many have come to believe that our job as Jews is to lay low, quietly perform the mitzvos, and wait patiently for the coming of Mashiach. Now, although this has been our predicament for quite some time, it's not always the correct way to serve Hashem. Many believe that it's best to keep things status quo, to follow and mimic the generations before us. But that is absolutely not the way of the Torah. As Shlomo HaMelech famously writes in Mishlei, there's a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting, and so on and so forth. It's very understandable that everything has its time and place. For example, when the Jews were standing in front of the Yam Suf and they called out in prayer, Hashem said, now is not the time for lip service. Now is the time to journey forward into the sea. But aren't we taught that praying to Hashem is the most powerful tool we have? Generally, yes it is. But it too has a time and place. And sometimes we need to close the siddur and actually take action. See, many Jews are waiting for the Geula. They're waiting for Mashiach to come get them from America, Europe, and the like. They're under the impression that Hashem will take care of everything without any physical action on their part. But as we saw by the Yam Suf, when the Jews cried out to Hashem, he said, Vayisa'u, just walk forward, and Hashem will take care of the rest. And in our predicament, he already has. Hashem has already miraculously built up this land and fully prepared it for us to take possession of. He set up Nefesh B'Nefesh and other organizations to help Jews have an easy transition. He set up Beit Shemesh and other cities where almost everyone speaks English, where businesses are flourishing. Hashem has made it so attainable for every Jew to come here. But Vayisa'u, the one action we must perform is to actually go forward. Hashem will not move your feet for you. He will not drag you here by your collar, and he certainly will not fly you here to Eretz Yisrael on a giant eagle. You can clearly see from the Makos and from the splitting of the sea that there is always a requirement for Moshe or Aaron to lift their staff or throw something in the air in order to commence the Makkah, the miracle. In fact, all throughout Tanakh, whenever a Navi performs a miracle, they always perform a physical action first. Of course, there's always tefillah, but it's always accompanied by a physical action. The rule is that even by a miracle, we are always expected at least to perform whatever physical action we can, and then Hashem will take over once we can no longer contribute. And it is absolutely no different by us. The great miracle of Kibbutz Goliath and the rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael. Hashem is clearly doing the vast majority of work, but we must absolutely do our part, both spiritually and, believe it or not, physically, in order to facilitate this miracle. And how do we do that? By actually packing our bags and getting on a plane. But due to our long gullus, it's been so many centuries that we've had no power whatsoever to physically facilitate the Geula. And over time, we convinced ourselves that all we can do is hope and pray. And that was true. For a long time, there really wasn't much for us to do on a physical level. But now, today, every single Jew has the capability to physically take part in the Kibbutz Goliath. But to ignore this and make believe nothing is happening around us, to make believe that the process of Geula hasn't begun, it's not only foolish and irresponsible, but it's selfish. Because it's delaying the Geula for all the Jews who already live in Eretz Yisrael, who yearn to see the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, and the Geula, which will bring an end to the thousands of years of our exile, pain, and suffering. To assume that the Geula, the Kibbutz Goliath, and the rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael will take place without any physical effort on our part is simply due to an ignorance of Torah knowledge, Jewish history, and quite frankly, the influence of Western society that has convinced so many Jews that life is about self-gratification and relaxation, and that working hard and putting an effort into something you believe in is simply foolish. Imagine how Avram Avinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, and David HaMelech would feel if they knew that in the generation of the final redemption, millions of Jews would rather live in mansions with jacuzzis and swimming pools, eat sushi, steak, and drive luxury cars, rather than get on a plane and fly safely to Eretz Yisrael to take part in the Kibbutz Goliath and be part of the redemption that we've been waiting for thousands of years. Now, I know that many would respond that we are taking action to bring the Geula through Torah and mitzvos. The truth is, Torah and mitzvos absolutely do bring the Geula. But now that the Geula process has actually begun, we must take actions that are directly connected to it. When Klal Yisroel stood in front of the Yam Suf and cried out to Hashem, he didn't say, if you want the sea to split, you need to learn a blot of Gemara or put on tefillin. No, he said, walk into the ocean. When Yoshua ben Nun entered the land with Klal Yisroel to conquer it, Hashem didn't tell him, say Tehillim, give some tzedakah. No, Hashem said, go into the land, take your swords, kill everybody, and physically conquer the land that I am giving you. And for those who might say, how do we know the Geula has begun? How do we know it's time to take action? I would respond, how large is the rock that you live under? How ignorant can somebody be of history and of current events to truly have no idea whether or not the Geula process hasn't only just begun, but that we are clearly knee-deep into it? It's true we no longer have prophets telling us exactly what to do, but that doesn't mean we have no guidance, because all of the great prophets wrote down in our Tanakh exactly what to expect before Mashiach comes. And guess what? All of those things are happening right now as we speak. And although we don't have prophets, Hashem has many other ways of speaking to us and guiding us. And many times Hashem's messages are very clear to anyone who's actually paying attention. Israel currently makes the headlines of every major news network on an almost daily basis. Hashem is doing this to direct our attention, the Jewish people. Anti-Semitism across the world has skyrocketed to tell us it is time to leave. And just in the past century, Israel has been transformed from a desert wasteland into a flourishing and beautiful land, an economic and military world power. All this isn't just extraordinary, but rather miraculous, without a shadow of a doubt. And all of this is to guide us, the Jewish people, back home, so we can complete our mission in this world. And I believe many Jews acknowledge all of this, but delay returning to Eretz Yisrael because it's difficult and challenging. But I ask, does anyone really believe that bringing the Geula would be an easy process? See, the Satan's primary job in this world is to stop us from reaching spiritual perfection, which is why, with every holy task, he's there getting in the way. But as we've been explaining, Eretz Yisrael is the final key to spiritual perfection and completing our holy mission, which is why there has always been an extraordinary force stopping Klal Yisroel from getting to Eretz Yisrael. We saw it first with the Meraglim, with Ezra and Nehemiah, and now with us. When the opportune times arise for us to get to Eretz Yisrael, the Satan turns the world upside down to try to stop us. The self-hating Jews who unfortunately, temporarily, make up a large part of the Israeli government, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the insanity of the world at large are all just manifestations of the Satan on his last stand to try to stop us from rebuilding this land. Bibi and all the rest of them are simply puppets in the hands of Hashem. There is only one solution to all of these problems, and that is the Jews keeping the Torah and serving Hashem in the land of Eretz Yisrael, where the Torah is meant to be performed. How do I know? Because it's written hundreds of times in the Torah, as clear as day. And as long as Jews continue to ignore the Torah and not return to Eretz Yisrael, we will continue to suffer. The future of the Jewish people and the world at large isn't in the hands of Aliyah Navi, nor is it in the hands of Mashiach, but rather it is, as has always been, in the hands of each and every individual Jew to make the conscious decision to give up some of this material world for the sake of glorifying this sacred name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. May every one of us have the strength to make the correct decision and be part of bringing the Geula. Chazak ve'ematz, my friends.